Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to CoinGecko's 32nd meetup. It's been a while since we've done one of these, so I'm really happy to welcome you guys all back with us here. My name is Zhong. I'm the head of research here at CoinGecko, and I'll be your host for today. Joining me today, we have a very exciting panel. We're going to talk about one of the hottest topics and or trend that has hit the crypto industry this year, which is AI. So the title of this meetup is called "Crypto and AI: When Worlds Collide." And before we begin, I just wanted to thank Y for being the sponsor for this meetup today. So I want to invite our three panelists. So welcome to the panel. We have Teng. He's the founder of Chain of Thought. Welcome back, Teng. It's I think the second time you've been here.
Yeah, hey Song. Yeah, I remember. It's been a while, but glad to be back here
Yeah.
again and talking about a very interesting sector.
Yeah. We also have Andrew Hyde. Andrew is the head of communications at the Render Network Foundation. Welcome, Andrew.
Hey, thanks for having me. Very excited to be here, and actually great projects to have on, and I'm excited to learn from them.
Yeah, and last but not least, we have Synergy, who's the AMA host and doing all things AMA for our sponsor today. Why? Welcome, Synergy.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here, and thank you so much to the wonderful guests for coming as well.
Nice, great. All right, let's sort of get started. And I think before I jump into the questions, I just sort of wanted to give a bit of context, just a bit of background, and we sort of level set everyone. I think for people that's been following this particular narrative of crypto and AI, it wouldn't be a surprise, right? Like I think ever since the launch of ChatGPT by OpenAI on November 20th, 2022, so it's been 2 years now since the launch of ChatGPT, right? So the field of AI has seen a complete Cambrian explosion in innovation and funding across the entire AI stack, right? So when people talk about AI, obviously people talk about the models, whether that's ChatGPT or that's Claude or Perplexity or Llama or what have you. But really the stack, the entire stack can be broken down into the infrastructure layer where you do all the compute and the data and things like that. There's sort of a coordination and orchestration layer where you may take a foundational model, you train it or you fine tune it, or you route the query to different models, right? If you have multiple, there are things like aggregators right now that can route a query to different models. And finally, you have an application layer, which essentially are things like the final things that a user sees, which is sort of like chatbots or AI agents today, right? I think from a bigger picture perspective, certainly when ChatGPT happened and you saw all this large corporates sort of pile into this, AI does seem to lend itself to centralization, right? All of these large tech companies, you name it, they are out there to buy or build or partner or integrate with anything that can give them an edge in AI, right? But against all of these very formidable foes, right? Against some of these are the largest companies in the world. The decentralized AI movement, right, has sort of stepped up to sort of prevent the complete capture of this new technology by all these centralized entities. So the last thing we want, I think, for all of us who are working in crypto and Web3 and things like that, is that we don't want a return to Web2 where the internet was sort of captured by a few centralized entities. So yeah, let's sort of jump straight into that. And firstly, I think just general question, just big picture. Just want to go around the table. Why do you guys think decentralized AI is important? What does the introduction of crypto and blockchain technologies to AI sort of enable for us, right? And I guess for Render and why as well, like how are your projects enabling the decentralization of AI? But perhaps we'll start with Teng Yan first. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I think you've covered a fair bit around like why we need decentralization in AI. It's because if you think about AI as a technology, it's a very centralizing technology. And the reason why it's owned, or at least the big AI models are actually owned by most of the top AI research labs or the big tech companies, is because like AI is a very resource intensive industry, right? There's very high capital expenditure that's required to actually launch an AI company. You need to buy all of this hardware and GPUs in order to do anything in AI. And so it's no wonder that these companies are the ones that actually are owning these like very large models that we see today, like Claude and GPT-4. So I think we can look at it from firstly a philosophical lens, right? We are all here in crypto because we believe in decentralization. We believe in democratizing power and wealth. We believe in open, permissionless networks where everybody can participate, whether you're in Singapore, you're in the US, you're in Africa. None of that sort of like matters, right? So I think that's one lens. And I think like AI being the most biggest like technology paradigm shift that we're probably seeing in our lifetimes, I think this technology deserves to be shared by everybody. And then I think later on, we'll probably go into the more practical use cases, like where crypto actually adds direct value and makes AI even better. I think that's where I think it's very interesting to sort of explore.
Yeah, coming to you, Andrew, what do you think, and like, how does Render enable the decentralization of AI?
Yeah, let me build on that. So first of all, we're live. I mean, we have a product used. We do 3D rendering really, really well. So we have nodes around the world that render 3D artists. So if you use Blender or Octane or Cinema 4D, we already work with artists. And the thing that we see with that is that we go after cost and we enable enhanced creativity. We let these artists actually thrive and grow big, kind of helping create like the next generation of innovation via art. So we've kind of attacked this problem a small start, and now we're kind of opening up to AI on a broader scale. So we've already started seeing it, and the usual plays that you listed, it's cost, it's decentralization. I think fast acting, like the ability for us to change to the market much quicker than these larger players, is a big part of it as well. I think why is it important? I think a lot of it is we care, right? Like I think that we're listening to the global community of developers, and they like what's being offered right now, but how does that change even in 6 months or a year? So I think we're listening to the needs of the development community and the creator community, and saying, is what's out there, that's been rapidly rolled out, is that a really good fit? We're able to pay our nodes. I think that's another big thing that's not super obvious, is that we're doing a burn on our chain every hour. We're taking in fiat and doing real world compute and interacting with a coin every hour. So I think it's a pretty cool thing to be able to have this distributed workforce, them being now nodes, and kind of building off of that. So for us, it's a little bit of art of why we care. It's a little bit of large language model, like the usual AI front, and it's a little bit about, we don't know. Like the developers are going to tell us what they find is interesting, and we're hopefully going to be able to match the power that they need.
Yeah, I think certainly. I think other than bringing your infrastructure services to artists and developers, I do think the other part around being able to pay nodes and incentivizing people to be part of this decentralized network is sort of something that crypto uniquely enables, I guess, for AI. And Synergy, coming to you, why do you think this is important, and how are you enabling decentralization of AI? Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for the question. I mean, obviously, it's definitely important. I think that we're all sort of in this field with the goal of decentralization as a central point. But I think I'm going to echo a lot what the speakers mentioned, and specifically being with regards to incentivization. So what we are seeing is that with blockchain and crypto fusing with AI, is that it's enabling projects to incentivize themselves. And what this does essentially is that you're incentivizing users to provide data that's required possibly for training these models. And then you also get networks, for example, that are actually incentivizing participation, like BitTensor. So this is not necessarily a new concept to, our industry, etc. But it's a place that definitely can be really tapped. Excuse me. And we are also seeing a lot more circular economies being created with different AI marketplaces. And just to circle back to what I earlier said again, it's where both the builders of AI models that are using the tools and the users of these AI tools are incentivized through participation. So I think that's a really big part, because it's also, if you look at it, another big example that I would love to give is that it sometimes can be much easier to raise funds in the Web3 space as opposed to the Web2 space. I think, however, this obviously more often than not, the funding that you get leads to sort of complications in the long term, but for the short term, it can really boost that. And what's nice about that is that you are incentivizing the average Joe to get involved as well. So you're not just seeing these companies that are, coming in with their Claude or closed system, ChatGPT, for example, and just scooping up all the incentives. You're getting, the average Joe that spent some time around as LLMs. Then if I was speak about why specifically, since the beginning, we've had the goal of moving to a decentralized framework, but we are not there yet. However, after our upcoming V4 framework and API access, we will be taking steps into governance as well as decentralized AI agents and sort of dealing with all those relevant decisions with regards to creating, managing, and utilizing those.
Nice. I think we're gonna definitely circle back to that funding point later on. But let's move on. I think the way I wanted to structure today's discussion is we'll sort of go through the different layers within the AI stack that I mentioned first earlier, and I'm going to start with the infrastructure layer. And Andrew, really coming to you first because you guys essentially play here, right? So one of the things that we often hear about is that the current AI models needs to be trained on mega cluster of GPUs, right? In that sort of run in single data centers, right? It's kind of hard to train a model if you just have some GPUs here, some GPUs there, and they sort of need to talk to each other through the internet. And this is not really the strength of DePIN networks, such as Render. I wonder, like, for the Render project, how do you guys see your role within the AI space? Where do you guys come in and fit in this sort of training or inference sort of space?
Yeah. So quick answer is we are, at the foundation, we implement what the community votes on. So whatever the community finds as the future is what we implement and kind of help build. So it's up to the community is the quick answer for that. Now, we've listened to the community. We've had 14 different times where the community's voted on projects. This last year, I think the big thought was that everybody just wanted access to a Docker install. So let's just give that to developers and let them run. What we're finding is, and I think what most of the community is finding, is that there's not much use for that that can compete with the big, the big firms out there right now. So we found that we thought the developers would be asking for something. We voted on that, built that, and really the developers aren't really asking for that right now, or the Web 2 solutions are too good and too cheap. I think I saw that ChatGPT is undercutting 60% of their hard costs right now. So nobody can compete on that. I mean, over when they start raising that, that's when Web3 can really shine. So we built out this thing. I keep on thinking about something called dark side of the moon processing, and I'm not sure if that's a common term at all. But most of the time,
can you explain more about that, though?
Yeah, so like most of our nodes are 3D artists that have this like large computer at home, and they go to bed, and that computer is idle. And so really they're selling that time and trade for during the day when they need to kind of trade it for their thing. So whenever it's dark outside is when they sell up their nodes. So we can really compete on price when it's dark. And so, if we have the dark side of the moon problem where, your model can wait a little bit or can ship to the other side of the world to kind of run, we can compete at a better level. So now we're kind of looking at the community and saying, all right, dark side of the moon, we think we can actually compete on cost. We really are talking to customers and people, really are wanting decentralized solutions right now. It's just getting through the checklist of the usual Web 2 things, of security, of speed, of reliability. I mean, they're really treating it like a real world problem or a real world solution to their actual problems. I mean, these are startups that have raised money. These are startups that have real customers. So it's not kind of this in theory stage. So we're kind of building live, but also building to real customers out there. So in the past, we've had a great example of we're really good at 3D. We've got this very niche need for GPU power. And now we're trying to figure out if there's other niches that make as much sense as 3D. I think 3D makes so much sense. What we're seeing with the Roddenberry archive is really, really exciting, which is Star Trek. And all of their assets are being rendered and kind of put out there for exploration by the fans in 16K resolution, so it can fit in the Sphere in Vegas. Really exciting, beautiful art. So yeah, I mean, we're listening to the community, and the community is reacting in a way. Is the other answer to that question.
Yeah, I didn't know that you guys were also involved in the Sphere. That's sort of a really exciting thing that's sort of happening.
It's funny. A lot of our artists are under NDA and can't talk about what they're doing publicly, but like you've seen work that's been done on the Render Network in day-to-day life, whether that's watching TV or Netflix or some live broadcasts or Sphere. Like our artists are kind of coming forward and saying, "Oh yeah, by the way, I did this," and it's just like blowing our minds.
Nice.
But they can't really talk about it. And then also it's an advantage. Like they're oftentimes small artists that really want to compete with these big studios and can't, because the big studios can build out data centers and they can't. So suddenly they can compete with them, and then they don't want to bring that up too much. They're like, "Oh yeah, I'm just a traveler and I've got a laptop and I send all my work out to a data center, to render instead of building out a data center," and they can compete with big studios that way. I think that's a brilliant
Nice.
use of the decentralization of work.
Yeah, that's great. The other aspect, I guess, of infrastructure is data, right? And synergy, with why I wanted to ask, how are you guys sourcing data to provide price predictions, right? Are you taking data from the blockchain or using data from certain data marketplaces? I should, I guess, caveat at this point, we haven't talked about your product, so Oracle, and perhaps you can also tell people a bit about that. You talked a bit about using data marketplaces and things like that, but I guess what's sort of the challenge there? Do you see data that's nicely labeled right out of the box, or there's actually a lot of work that you guys have to do to sort of prep the data before you feed it into your AI? Yeah.
Awesome, thanks. Well, just to give everyone a quick introduction to Why. So Why is a market analytics and prediction service provider. We offer a variety of solutions to predict market trends in real time. We do that by utilizing AI and the Why framework based on past and current data from multiple sources such as on-chain activities, centralized exchange, order books, social sentiment, traditional finance, and more. Then if we also, I must say that you can access this through our Telegram mini app, our Telegram bot, and most importantly, our recently released web dashboard using the Why token. But to go back to the question, it's a great question. So, first, of course, we must look at what data are we actually talking about. So we currently have 9 models. I'm going to go through them quickly. So it's the centralized exchange, options, global news, order books, Twitter, exchange balances, stablecoins, yields, and traditional finance. So the data is coming from a range of sources that relate to those specific models. Of course, I cannot disclose exactly what those are, as you can imagine, but a lot of that is focused from on-chain, centralized exchange, social media, etc. And I think one of the biggest challenges that the development team was facing is that the data is not necessarily labeled quite well. How do I say, out of the box? So unfortunately, we've had to create a dedicated data processor that is put in place for each source, which then will format that data into a unified format, which then can actually be used for further steps, and that being such as feature engineering, etc. And all of these processes are now automated, which was a major focus in the beginning, setting up these frameworks, so that now when implementing new sources, it doesn't require as much work.
Yeah, that sort of makes sense. I guess, for us at CoinGecko here as well, because we also integrate data from all sorts of sources, it is, significant prepping that goes into before, it gets fed into our backend as well. Teng, coming to you, I think, we're seeing initial crypto AI projects that were really, began with compute aggregation, right? But emerging now, we're seeing more projects, related to data as well, sourcing and labeling, trying to get, more data sets and getting these data sets sort of organized so that they can be fed to other people. So some of these examples are like Grass, and we have, very different data DAOs that have sort of emerged, focusing on sort of niche sectors and areas. Can you, help explain, why this is important, and how does crypto help in incentivizing this projects and making sure they're sort of sustainable and people actually want to participate in this.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, data is not a new thing. Like data has been around, AI has been around for a while. And if you look into what goes into training an AI model, basically you have two components. You have compute as well as you have data. And in the last like 2 or 3 years, the main limiting constraint was basically compute, right? Everybody's just trying to get the best high-end GPUs, NVIDIA's H100s. Well, basically, you have to be on some special list to be able to get direct access to these like GPUs. But I think that is easing up a little bit. And what we're actually finding right now is that we are hitting a wall in terms of like the data that we have, right? And you look at the big AI models today, they're basically been trained on the entirety of the internet. And most of that public data is already gone into these AI models. So the next natural question is, how do we get to the next level of intelligence? How do we get to the next better models? And to do that, we're going to need to tap into like better data sources, right? Especially if you believe in the scaling laws. Compute and data are going to be the key elements around that. So if you think about data, I think there are a few kinds of data that are probably valuable today. These are basically, firstly, I would say like any data that's pretty public, right? Like on your social media and all that may not be particularly valuable because like most of that has already been incorporated into some of these like data sets that we use to train AI models. To me, what are really interesting in the data space is really being able to get access to say private data sets, information that isn't readily available online, information that's basically stuck in silos today. So examples of this would be say consumer spending data, financial data that's, for example, stuck in your Plate app, healthcare data that's basically stuck in the hospitals that are out there, biometric data that is stored on your devices and stuck within the Apple or Oura Ring ecosystem, right? All of these data are very interesting. And crypto gives you a way, for example, like using incentive networks to get people to actually contribute their data in a grassroots way and help to break down all these different silos of data that's out there, right? So I think that's one potential use case of like crypto. I think the other is we think about like, how do we get to the next level of like intelligence and autonomous like AI agents that are able to do things on their own? We are still kind of like far from that future. And the reason is because like a lot of the data that we need to train this next version of like AI agents is not available today yet. And so, for example, if you want to take an AI agent that's able to help me do a lot of different tasks, is able to have very good planning and reasoning skills, you need data sets, for example, screen share data of how, say, I as a IT worker is actually performing all my tasks on the different applications. And we don't have these data sets today. And by using crypto incentives, we have an opportunity to, for example, incentivize people to create some of these new data sets that aren't even available today right now. So I think there are a few other sectors within data which I think is very interesting, like very high quality annotated data, synthetic data. But I think we won't really get into this. But at a very high level, I think it's very important. And then the second part to this, which I just want to touch on briefly, is that by using crypto, what we can do is we can give people who contribute their data ownership over this data as well, right? They get to share in the revenue that's generated by some of this data that they actually contribute and provide. Today, all of the big tech companies, social media companies like Meta basically monetizes all of your user-generated content and doesn't give you any cut or any share of the revenue they actually generated from advertising, which is basically huge. And I, for one, want to live in that future where I also own some of that too.
Yeah, I think it does that. This whole incentivization and finding the right incentives to incentivize the right behavior, or certainly the behavior that you want, is sort of central to the whole crypto ethos as well. Let's move on to the coordination and sort of orchestration layer, and we're going to talk a bit more about the different models, the foundational models that sort of exist, and where we are with some of these. I think we often talk about ChatGPT and Claude, and these are very much closed source models. And then we have open source models as well, and I guess Meta's Llama is sort of the most famous example and certainly the most widely used. I'm curious, if you guys are keeping up with the latest developments, because there are just so many developments. There seems to be an update every quarter that or even a couple of months where you can do more, they can reason, or there are more tokens that they can digest. How do you view the current competition between the models today? And do you think, I think for people who are into decentralized AI, I guess the open source alternatives are keeping up with the closed source sort of models? And perhaps start with Synergy. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think that's a great question. I personally believe that the competition between the open source and closed source AI models is rapidly evolving, and the gap between both is shrinking. And I feel that closed source models like ChatGPT and Claude, they benefit from having significant resources behind them, which can often allow for better performance and refinement, etc. However, I feel that open source models such as Meta's Llama, they offer better flexibility, transparency, and adaptability. And this can really help go towards enabling like rapid innovation and customization by the AI global community as a whole. I mean, if I was to bring up an example of two different systems, look at Windows versus Linux. You can just see how Linux has quite a huge following, cult following, and there's a lot of customization and things that you can do to that. Whereas Microsoft to Windows is a much more closed system where you're limited to what you can actually do. And I'll say that while closed models often excel in performance and multimodal capabilities, it is due to their access to extensive data and infrastructure, whereas the open source models are making pretty impressive progress and are very competitive for specialized tasks. And as privacy, transparency, and ethical concerns grow in the space, I personally feel that open source models are going to become even more increasingly viable. And that is going to narrow, like I said earlier, the gap between closed source alternatives and then, of course, open source.
What about you, Andrew? What are you seeing on your end? Do you actively measure this sort of performance or what people are using? Yeah.
We don't. It's not a huge focus on us. I mean, I think the history of that is there's not a lot of open source with hosting. I mean, I think just security-wise, we're not seeing a lot with Web 2. So Web 3, yeah, we believe in open source. We want to see more of that. It's just a slower adoption. I think if you have to pick between security and open source, you're going to pick security at first and then hopefully get towards open source in the future. But I think that we're seeing projects kind of be a little bit more deliberate about that and less purists about the open source aspect of that. But I want to see it, but I'm not noticing a lot.
Okay. And Teng Yen, you obviously, I'm sure you're keeping up with this, and where do you see this, open source versus closed source? Yeah. Do people just pick the one that's fastest, I guess?
Yeah, so I mean, if you look at it today, like the truth is that the closed source models are definitely more performant. If you ask any like AI app developer, like more than 90% of them will say they'll be using like these closed source models, right? Typically it's Claude or GPT-4, just because they are definitely much more performant today than any of the open source models out there. And I do shudder a bit to think like if Meta wasn't making its like Llama models like open source, the open source world will be a lot kind of like further behind from where we are today. I think if you looked at what has happened over the last like 1 to 2 years, and honestly, we don't have a lot of historical data, we can see that usually what happens is that one of these top like AI research labs release a new version of their model. That's basically the state of the art. It's basically the best performance in all these different benchmarks and metrics. And then we see that after that, a few other like newer, smaller research labs will release another model that is performing close to what some of these like closed source models are doing, and then we'll see some open source models that actually start to perform that. Right? So you can see it's a bit like a race. There's a bit of a step. Usually, what happens is the closed source models lead the way because like just so much of the AI talent today is basically in the top research labs like OpenAI. But then like once a feature goes out, then we can see everybody comes in just because the competition is so key today. So I think like as Synergy say, I'm optimistic that open source models will have their opportunity to play catch up. But I think like both of these like open source and closed source, they have their role to sort of like play. Open source models, I think, is a lot better for finding like very specific use cases, like which basically the top research labs don't really have the bandwidth at all to explore in all these different like verticals and all that, and it becomes a lot easier for people to experiment with some of these things. So I think it's going to be a future where both of these models sort of like coexist.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to zoom in on this point that Teng mentioned. Like, we have the big boys who are building these large foundational models, right? And then we sort of have then smaller labs, or perhaps your academia, or you're in a specific industry, and then there are groups that are building sort of very specific, maybe much smaller models, but they are sort of fine-tuned for a particular use case. I just wanted to go around and ask, because we also talked about the fact that perhaps the entire internet has already been trained, right? Like on like these GPT-4 or Claude has already absorbed all the available, sort of publicly available data. So they're sort of like there already. And do you think there'll be a shift towards just fine-tuning models for specific use cases instead of continuously training this large foundational models, I guess? Instead of people using these large models, everyone will try to sort of take that as the base and then sort of build your own little assistant or your own little AI model that's going to output what you want, because either you have your own specific data or you have your own specific use case that may be pretty unique. And maybe come to Andrew first.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about examples of what we're seeing. I mean, this last week, we run the grants program. So if you go to renderfoundation.com/grants, you'll see just kind of our application. And it's a lot of artists, and it's a lot of people that have access to just amazing amounts of textures and big libraries and things that have been built over 20 years of innovation and kind of modeling in 3D. And what we're finding is that there's a lot of people that want to go around a city with a camera and actually take pictures to have that patina, have the realness, have the actual culture and history of a place to put into their futurism and art. And so we have people walking around a couple of cities right now making live, with a grant from us, making live 3D textures from cities, just to basically kind of take a step back. And then that way their art and that way their story has a little bit more of a rich history and feel to it. So I'm wondering how that applies to kind of large language and big data sets. As you said, it's already been crawled, right? Like if it's out there, it's already been done. So I don't have a lot to add on kind of the data sets and what to do, but I think that it's going to maybe go back a little bit and say, like, let's make sure this is really in line with what we need it to be, and clean it up and kind of act in a way that we expect it to be. Not sure if that's the future, but that's a guess I have.
Yeah, I guess certainly if in the old days, like people will well, not in the old days, like in the current way of how these people work, you sort of have special brushes or special texture packs that goes around. I wonder if you can train a AI to output pictures which have a certain look, I guess, that you may want, and that sort of represents your style. Teng Yen, coming to you, do you see this shift towards use case specific models, or we're still far away, you think, from this?
So I mean, to answer that question, I think we just need to look at what are the games like being played over here, right? And there are actually a few different things, right? So that's why I think we can't lump them all in the same bucket. So one, if you look at what the top AI research labs like Anthropic, OpenAI are building towards, they're playing a very different game. They're building towards AGI, right? Their goal is to create AGI, artificial general intelligence, or ASI, artificial super intelligence. They're not there to play the use case sort of like game. That may be a side quest for them in terms of being able to generate revenue to get to their goal, but their goal is to make the most powerful, the most intelligent model in the world. And I think there are only going to be like very few players who have the capital and resources to be able to do that. Right? And we can really see it's probably just a handful of companies that are able to do this: the Googles, Amazons, OpenAI, Anthropics, and so on. And very few new entrants will be able to join and play part of that game. But that being said, like what they are doing is that as these new models actually come to place, there's a lot of opportunity for everybody else in the world to basically take what they have built in these models and actually apply them to all of your different use cases that are out there, right? Be it in healthcare, be it in education, be it in climate change. And for many of these industries and use cases, you don't need the most performance, state-of-the-art models to be able to actually add value. Like, for example, I think today, right, if we just stopped all of AI development, I think like even with the level of technology we have, even the level of performance of AI that we have today, I think we still have like many years of build out left in terms of just using the current models we have today to actually make productivity gains in all these different industries that we have, because it just takes time for entrepreneurs, founders, builders to actually take the AI tools and actually start to build in their very specific verticals, which takes a lot of like both engineering effort and a lot of like deep domain expertise around that. So I think that's where we are. So we're going to see this continue on. We're going to have these like very, very big, large models that probably most people won't be able to run in the systems continue to improve over time. And then we're also going to see everybody start to create a lot of like smaller, interesting fine-tuning models for their own like sort of like interests or use cases. That's also going to be very important in the world.
Yeah, I think when you mention games and sort of medical use cases, obviously the Nobel Prize was just awarded to AI use sort of AI use case where you could map the you could model the proteins, I believe. And speaking of games, obviously one of the famous use case of AI is having to solve Go, right? The AlphaGo, beating even the best human players around that, and those were really trained specifically for those particular use cases. Why and Synergy, coming to you from the why perspective, you guys have models, and you said you have 9 different AI models. I guess I just from your experience, how are you guys develop these models? Like, do you use a base or foundational model and then you sort of fine tune, or you sort of train everything from scratch, which sounds like a lot of effort, and yeah, just wondering, how do you guys do it?
I think that I think we definitely are utilizing foundational models, and then from there, I'm not too clued up on the tech side of it, but we have foundational models that we then build upon from there. So to circle back to like what you asked the other two esteemed guests here, I think that just like us, there was a shift towards, there's been a shift towards more specialized, fine-tuned models that are being created for the specific use cases. So in our case, being order book or centralized exchange, each model has a specific use case within the overall, Y engine. And sort of as these foundational models like GPT-4 and Claude achieve high levels of general intelligence, I think the focus is going to be on adapting them to meet the unique needs of different users and industries. So if I was to bring up an example, if we look at the diversity of applications across the fields, so let's say, for example, we have law, healthcare, finance, and customer service. What this means is that a one-size-fits-all model often will lack the precision needed for specialized tasks. So I think that's very important that models, I think that the foundational level will always be important, but I think that there will always be space for a layer to be on top of it, sort of like a layer 2 in the crypto space, for example.
Yeah, I think speaking of precision, I guess is there a way you could describe to us about how these models that you have are trained, and how do you provide feedback and back test to sort of improve the models that you have?
Sure, yeah, no problem. Sure, I could speak a little bit into that. So we go sort of, we continuously are going over the models and continuously optimizing and enhancing the models. I cannot speak too much on that, unfortunately, but we will be providing a lot more access to our API and things like that, where users then will probably get a much better insight into that question.
Okay. Let's move on. I think to the application side of things. Obviously the one thing that blew up recently are sort of AI agents, right? And while I think currently these are a little more than sort of glorified chatbots, it does make sense to I guess I'll jump into the hype surrounding this agents and sort of the meme tokens to a certain extent, and talk about whether you think this frenzy has been good to sort of bring attention to crypto AI, or it's sort of just a distraction at this point, and there are like larger breakthroughs that we can sort of focus on. Maybe start with Teng Yan is a difficult, I guess, sort of question.
He might have just stepped away. I'm happy to grab it though.
Go ahead, Andrew. Yeah.
I mean, any use is interesting. So we just hired, a couple people, indie hackers, just to basically say, like, listen to what's going on and figure out how to build upon it. And so, like, anytime we see something, and like this is, I mean, it's great looking at Anthropic and all these companies are releasing white papers, are releasing research papers, and like we get to read them and be like, all right, how do we apply that to art? How do we apply that to commerce? How do we apply that to our daily lives? How do we apply that to like the motivation that we have to create? And so, yeah, anytime you see something, it's like interesting. And then like, what's the actual like second layer story of that? I think that's where I get most excited. So yeah, it's kind of silly. It's chatbots, but pretty interesting. I saw an application the other day that was a phone at an Airbnb, and you picked it up and it called the front desk, and it was just an AI bot. And it was like, hey, where are there extra towels? And it was trained to like, oh yeah, we store the extra towels here. It's like, oh, and then the chatbot tried to upsell me on staying an extra night for 40% off. And it was like, it took me a little bit to be like, oh my goodness, this is a real use. I've been tricked. I thought this was a British lady that was my Airbnb host, and this is completely a chatbot. But it was done super well. I had the background noise. It actually knew a lot about the property, and then I got to play around with it with my human voice, playing around with the actual like, all right, what do you not know? What are the limitations of this? And it was just fascinating.
Yeah, and sort of try to push the limits of I guess what it can or cannot respond to.
Yeah, it was quite interesting. So
okay. Yeah, Teng Yan, so we were talking about these AI agents, right, that have sort of taken off, and there's a whole frenzy around it, and the meme coin tokens or the tokens that are associated with them. I guess wondering from your point of view, does this bring good attention to crypto AI, and sort of all publicity is good publicity, right? Or this is just a kind of unwelcome sort of distraction from the sort of deeper technical stuff that's sort of happening?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I mean, to be honest, like I definitely the benefits are greater than the sort of like noise that's kind of like generating, right? And I'm actually not surprised that all of this kind of like thing around AI agents and meme coins actually blew up over the last couple of weeks. Because if you look at how like new technologies, and especially like new technology primitives, are typically adopted, it usually starts in this way, right? It starts off looking like a toy. People are just having fun and entertainment, and over time, as the technology progresses, it evolves into something that actually has like actual productivity. So for example, like we look at what happened with like social media, right? We had like Friendster, we had like MySpace, and could you imagine that this something like that would actually become one of the most powerful companies in the world? And there are people who say that Meta is probably could even be the largest like company in the world in the next like 5 to 7 years, just because of the amount of data that they actually are collecting and holding. So I think that is something that's is quite mind-blowing, but also kind of worth keeping in mind. So I think the same thing is really happening here with AI agents. Like we've just unlocked a new level of technology in our humanities like technology tree, and now people are experimenting with all of these different things. It's captured people's attention, but the use cases are just like very much like just entertainment focused. It's funny, it's pretty interesting, but the actual productive use cases, people are kind of like still building behind the scenes, and it'll take a while for that technology to actually start being like very practical. But it brings in both like attention in terms of like developer interest. It brings in capital, because like now VCs feel like, hey, I need to really get in on this trend. I need to find the next like AI agent startup and invest in it. Otherwise, what am I going to tell my LPs when I told them that I missed this entire wave? So I think it's overall a good thing.
Yeah, and synergy from Wise perspective, have you looked at this? You guys looked at this with like amusement, or are you gonna build your own AI agent? Like, what's sort of the view from your end?
Thank you so much. I think we've absolutely loved it, and I really like what Teng was saying. I think that the two main things is that it's bringing capital, attention, and that therefore leads to more development. And it's a sort of a new technology. So of course we're going to see capital go into that. And if you were to follow sort of crypto Twitter in a way, if you go every time there's like this new AI thing, a new wave of projects pop up, and then that becomes sort of a new trend, and it moves on to there. So I personally am absolutely loving it. I mean, I came across this Terminal of Truths, I think it's called, Twitter account. And as I understand, it is actually, it is generated by an AI agent. So the account associated to the token is an AI agent that has like full control over the Twitter account, and that is like, essentially trained on internet law, essentially, or crypto Twitter law. And it's just really interesting seeing, because like, I don't think it necessarily brings any new attention to crypto AI as a general thing. However, given how niche of a trend it is, but I still feel like that it still has its own important mark to make in the scene. I think that we're all going to remember this phase with like the first AI agent came out. So I don't, whether it's an unwelcome distraction, I mean, it definitely depends whether you think a meme coin in general is beneficial to the crypto and blockchain technology as a whole or not. I think that it's a great place for innovation and fun to mix, and that sometimes can lead to some really innovative features being released. So I think it's really awesome, and we definitely will be looking at AI agents in the future.
Yeah, I think with some of these, I think it really does, at least from my perspective, it does bring attention to where the technology is now and what is sort of possible. And obviously, like you said, it sort of will stimulate people to think about, okay, what's next? What can we build next? How can we, sort of further extend this to other possible use cases? And I wanted to sort of ask about that as well, right? We talk about AI agents, and right now people talk about oh, you can sort of own these agents in a decentralized manner. Maybe people can come together and own a piece of this agent. But I really wanted to sort of push a bit further and maybe ask if we push it out, if we integrate these agents with crypto, with maybe not just crypto but other sort of data sources, or maybe like some level of automation and things like that, what could be the possibility? Like what is the potential of this AI agents, if we just look maybe even just 3 years down the road? Yeah, maybe start with synergy. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. I mean, off the bat, the first thing that comes to my head is that I think AI agents would fit, with some fine tuning, fit quite nicely into the customer service department. So I think that that's already, like something that's really like, popping off. And to circle back what I said about the meme coin with the AI agent running the Twitter. I mean, I've seen another AI agent, if I'm not mistaken, it's called Luna, that is actually like live streaming on TikTok. And it has the ability to engage with this community via chat, and by actually sending them tokens as well for completing, whatever tasks and things like that. So it's quite interesting. You're seeing the intersection here of the social media, how do I say, like influencer sort of craze meeting with crypto as well, and AI blended in a beautiful mixing pot. So I would say that the possibilities are quite endless. I mean, it really goes to our imagination. What can we do with AI? The more time that we spend experimenting, fine tuning, and adjusting, we realize like, oh, maybe this model is already actually good at doing this. If you look at examples in real life, how often have we created a technology to, let's say, for example, find us X, and then meanwhile, it turns out that it's terrible at finding the X thing, but it's really good at finding B. So it definitely comes around to just how you interpret the creation and application of these AI agents. But I think that we're definitely seeing the evolution of meme tokens right now, and I wouldn't be surprised if going forward, most of these meme accounts will be actually run by AI agents with a bit of human hand behind it the whole time.
Yeah, Andrew, any thoughts on this? What's sort of the realm of possibility, I guess, of what these agents can do in the future?
Yeah, I think it's kind of, I mean, the Joker in me wants to think NFT to meme coin to now AI agent. Like what's the bonk? What's the big application from that? I'm not quite sure. I think I'm going to Art Basel in a couple of weeks, which is in Miami. I think it's the world's
Nice.
largest art show. We're doing a couple installations there and kind of featuring art artists there. It's a really good fit. One of the things that Art Basel is requiring is some of their displays and shows are all AI generated. So here in this, discussion on is AI art, the world's largest art show is actually having specific areas where it's only welcome. So are we going to have like a future in which like we're really going to go back to basics? Like I'm looking at my, all my feeds this morning, and there's this like deep connection for one-on-one connection and people actually reaching out and like having this human experience. And then there's also this like algorithm fed, crazy news story that's been kind of taking over our lives. So both, right? Like I see both as like huge need and like amazing creative landscape, and also like, are people going to pull back and say like no AI art, like no, not one-on-one human experiences? Let's not be efficient with this one. Let's actually just like care about our experience a little bit more. And I don't know if we're going to be able to jump that with AI.
Yeah, I think it's sort of a toss-up. I don't think any side have sort of won the argument yet. Teng Yan, anything to add to this? And what do you see that these things can possibly do in the future?
Yeah, so actually, just like before this, I was actually on a call with David from OLAS, and OLAS is building this like multi-agent framework. And we were actually just chatting a bit on this topic, right? What's the future of AI agents? And I think we both came to agree that the future for this technology is infinite, and that's the reason why it's so difficult for our minds to sort of like wrap our heads around this, right? Because in the future, it's not impossible to see like AI agents being able to do almost every single thing that we are able to do today. So the question is like, where are we today, and how far away is that potential future? And we are probably still in the very, very early days of this, right? And if you look at most of the AI agents, most of them, they look very good on demos, but actually they're definitely not ready for prime time. If you put them out in the real world, they actually start to break because of all these different edge cases that they haven't really figured out because of hallucinations and all these like I would say pitfalls of using like large language models in these agents. So I think it's just having like a view of like what the future potential could be, which is basically infinite, and you can literally build any single thing that you can put your mind to and imagine as an AI agent, and also understand like the challenges of where the technology is today. And I think if you keep these two things in mind, especially if you're a founder or builder in the space, then you have a better sense of like where this whole space itself are headed towards. So just a bit of a high level answer, but it's been something I'm thinking about as well.
Nice. So future seems to be endless possibilities as long as people build it, and I think build it mindfully. I think I wanted to sort of circle back to the sort of infrastructure question before we sort of wrap up. The other part of the evolution of these models, I guess, is that they can begin to run, I think, on lower spec and even cheaper consumer hardware, right? You will see like Apple talk about Apple Intelligence that's going to run on the mobile phone. It's not really going to run in the cloud and things like that. And you can even run this on GPU without GPUs. Do you see this as sort of a crucial shift in terms of efficiency, but also in privacy, right? Where if a model can sort of run locally on your machine, you may not need to share your data with the greater sort of hive mind foundational model. And perhaps Andrew coming to you on this, because you work in this infrastructure layer.
Yeah, I mean, going back to like, we don't know what our users are doing. We're end-to-end encrypted, so they have to tell us. I was reading one of the research papers from Anthropic about kind of the multi-shot, many-shot jailbreaking, and talking about how, like, you know, like the safeguards that we build are going to be built around. So and maybe it's a little too early in the morning for me to really dig into that question, but I think that's where my mind goes, is that, you know, we kind of have this like beautiful ability to be and then encrypted, and like users own their data and get to do with it. We had a hardware startup doing healthcare, and they wanted to run all their AI models on somebody's watch or on somebody's phone while they're in the doctor, and it fully lived on their device and it didn't exit. And that was fascinating to us, just as far as like a great use case of you know, decentralized, encrypted, you know, you own your own data and you're actually doing the processes on your phone. I mean, the M2 chip on your laptop or on the Apple laptops are incredibly powerful right now. I mean, we're going, you know, all the big processors, and then we're like, wait a minute, the M2 is kind of on track in all these benchmark tests. So I think the future is actually going to be, these edge cases are going to catch on, and then we're going to build on those. I think that's kind of my roundabout way to answer that question, is I think we're going to find these like small health tech, you know, hardware problems, and then that's going to catch fire with other implementations.
And maybe we'll have like Apple Silicon Cloud as well, like decentralized Apple Silicon network, right? So that people who can't get NVIDIA chips, I guess, can also train on Apple Silicon.
Yeah, I mean, it's been joked about that Teslas are going to roll that out. Whether you believe that or not is another story. But, you know, like, it's an interesting model. You know, it's not the speed of the internet connection. It's actually the ability of the GPU at the time. So,
yeah. Synergy, you know, do you see, you know, can we really shrink down the model to sort of run on your phone, and then you sort of have a model that sort of just local?
Yes, I definitely think we can. I think we're already, as you've stated with Apple and all their announcements, we're already seeing a sort of shift towards that. And I would just like to highlight one of the big things that is such a crucial shift here is that it relates to accessibility. Now, if you look at developing countries, not everyone has access to these, you know, M2 chips or a MacBook or whatever like this. Some people only have access to a very basic smartphone, even if they're lucky, a smartphone. So also a lot of the people might be living in rural conditions, for example, where the infrastructure and connectivity become an issue, where you're not actually able to engage with, you know, ChatGPT on the daily or anything like that, because there's such a delay in signal, for example. But a great way that you could see is now, for example, if we look at farming as an example, with the way we can like literally boil it down to on a cell phone, and the farmer can now, if there's any issues that he has and he needs to know about farming, for example, this tailored system that's on his phone, he can easily access, even if he's in, you know, the middle of nowhere. He isn't exactly, you know, stuck on that point. And you know, so that's honestly for me the biggest part. Is just, it marks a shift, because if you were to look at technology through the times, it usually trickles down from the wealthy that can afford it, you know, TVs at first, then it trickled down, computers at first, and it trickled down. So it's great to see this trickling happening so quickly, because it means that you know, users that potentially do not have the same access or resources that other people do still might be able to actually access this technology. And I think it's really big for consumer applications in the future.
Yep. Teng, anything to add to that, or?
Yeah, I guess just very quickly, like you know, with edge computing, which is basically like what you described, like really shifting the inference down to the user-owned devices, like our computers and mobile phones. To me, the main advantage here is really around privacy, and being able to have the AI models run locally on your device without having to touch any kind of like cloud server is the way that, you know, you would get users, you know, even like myself, like feeling safe, you know, for it to basically have a look at my messages, look through my emails, and actually truly create sort of like personalized agent. I know Apple has their Apple Intelligence, but it also has, you know, some of it actually goes to their sort of like private cloud servers as well, and you have kind of rely on a bit of like a replication over there. And if you look at how some of the evolution of these like privacy preserving technologies that we have today, like fully homophobic encryption or zero knowledge proofs. I think these technologies are still also like many years out to becoming like really practical in terms of like being used. And if you want to be able to use like private data that is stored on our devices, then I think like, you know, having these AI models run locally is probably going to be a very big unlock, and it could unlock a very big level of like personalization in all these like different consumer apps that we're using. Like imagine if it knows like what are my, say, preferences based on reading some of my email addresses. You know, it can start to recommend me a lot of very interesting things as I start to use like different apps, like even like maybe say Shopee, like which is basically an online shopping app. It can tell me like what I need to buy just based on some of the information it has like on my mobile phone. So I think there's a very interesting like future as a consumer.
Yeah. We're sort of running out of time, but I did wanted to circle back to the funding question, because I think that's really important. We've seen a lot of funding flow into the AI space, right, from VCs and stuff like that. But a lot of that money is obviously going to, you know, the large, whether you want to call them foundations or labs that are building, you know, these centralized models. And I wonder if you guys are seeing the same appetite for the decentralized AI space, particularly from, you know, VCs or institutional investors. You know, obviously, you know, with some of these projects, what we have seen is that they do a node sale or a token sale. Do you think this is the best way for crypto AI projects to sort of fund themselves? And Teng, I think really start with you first. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So I think a few things to note is that like crypto generally is a market where there is a lot of capital that's flowing around, and that's why you can see many companies and protocols in the crypto space generally raise at very large valuations that you would never see in the software Web2 space, given their level of like development or like user metrics. So I think that's one thing to take note. And secondly, definitely, I would say that a lot of like VCs are looking in the crypto AI space. But I would also say that like in my conversations with them is that there is a good amount of hesitation. And the reason is that right now, many of them are still unsure where the truly large markets are going to be in crypto AI. Is it, you know, for example, we have things like verifiable inference. Like, is that going to be a big market? Decentralized like GPU marketplaces, how big is that going to be? So I think like many of them are slowly building up their conviction, and for them to make these investments in the space, they need to have a pretty high level of conviction, especially because like valuations among like these AI startups are actually still pretty high. You know, if you look at some of these like Series A rounds of some of the larger AI protocols, these are already at like multi-$100 million of valuations, right? So if you're a VC, you have to expect, if you want like venture like returns, you have to expect that to at least do a 10x, which would be like 10 billion in valuation at least for you to get that good outcome from that, right? So I think it's a bit of there is some, I guess, like overvaluation or slight frothiness that is there in the space, and there is still some hesitation among like where are the sectors that they really should be deploying their capital into. But I think what this also means is that there are opportunities for very astute investors to also find the alpha and edge in the space.
Yep. Synergy, you with why you guys have a token, and you know how do you think, you know, that helps you guys with the project? Yeah.
Also, I think it definitely helped with funding. That's the most important thing, was able to help with development and stuff like that. And I say, like I circle back to like the earlier answer, it's sometimes simpler to raise funds through the Web3 route than a Web2 route, for example. And I think that's what the team essentially went for. And I would say that, you know, the feeling is that the decentralized AI sector is not necessarily attracted the same level of venture capital interest. And I feel like to sort of mirror what Teng said, you know, many investors are cautious, you know, due to early stage risks, the regulatory uncertainty in the crypto world, and we don't exactly know which market is going to be the big one for this. And I'd say that the current token and node sale mechanisms do help bootstrap decentralized AI projects like ourselves, but you know, might not fully address the long-term funding needs that some of these projects have. And I think to attract more capital, then, you know, I think that these projects, you know, might have to consider sort of hybrid funding models where you're combining token sales with traditional equity, or perhaps even a DAO structure that allows you to like sort of align the investor and the project incentives together. And I think, and then ultimately one part that also will really help is building strategic partnerships with established tech companies. I think that's really big for networks, credibility, and most importantly, funding opportunities.
Yeah, and Andrew, with Render, you guys released the token early days, and now there's been some changes. How has that experience been? And
Yeah, I mean, we're a 2017 ICO project. I mean,
Yeah.
we're the old man on the
Old
block
school.
at this point, right?
Yeah.
2 years ago, we switched from kind of Ethereum to Solana, though, and so kind of it re-energized our community and how we fund ourselves. How does the foundation fund itself? And the community voted to kind of have an emissions schedule that rewarded nodes. So that's another way to look at it. Is our burn mint mechanism actually funds the ability for us to have more nodes on network for our developers to play around with, have cheaper access to compute power, and kind of build on the network. So I think that's the third model there, is that like if you've been around, if you've been in the space delivering quality results, sometimes you've got enough to play with that the community then rewards itself and kind of builds on its own project.
Okay, cool. I'm conscious that we've gone over, and sort of just last sort of question to wrap up. Tell us a bit more about what we can expect from your respective projects, and what will you be watching for in the decentralized AI and in crypto AI space in 2025, and maybe start with Synergy.
Thanks. Yeah. No, firstly, thank you, CoinGecko, for hosting this phenomenal event, and thank you to Chain of Thoughts and Render Network. Really enjoyed it, learned a lot. In terms of why, we have just released our free Telegram app, which enables you to monitor the market, visualize trends, and filter asset sentiment in real time. So you guys can go check that out now. For like 2025, we're a bit of a selfish one, but we're pretty excited for our upcoming version 4 of our framework. As well as API access, and what these two upgrades sort of entail is optimization, enhanced capabilities, and we're going to have some different timeframes for the strategies available in our dashboard. And of course, API access to our Oracle will be made available. Heading to 2025, we will release a future development milestone, so an updated one, should I say, and that will but to provide a sort of a leak right now, we could definitely be expecting additional symbols, more trading strategies, more models, and sort of continued overall optimization enhancements of the models. And if you guys want, you can check us out on our Twitter. And we do have a very spooky Halloween-themed thread contest going on now.
Cool. And Andrew, what can we expect from Render in 2025?
There we go. I think we released we had this idea that, let the developers build on this open platform and we'll see what they do with it. And I don't think that happened this last year. So I think next year's strategy is much more on, we've got AI scouts. So we have hackers that we've hired that we're just saying like, please play with it and report back and build onboarding tools and build the documentation and build, let's actually do the work to kind of build the network and build the systems. So that's what we're expecting. I really want to see fun stuff with the Roddenberry Archive, which, Star Trek and, ability to have immersive experiences. We're seeing a lot of sim plates is something that's come up upon our radar that we've been really interested in. Or like if you're driving down a car and in a movie, there's the background city. So those cities are being rendered at amazing quality and amazing, so you have, as a director, you have the ability to choose between night, day, northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, all this. So the democratization of filmmaking, of creation, of art, I want to see that bleed over into kind of the development space.
Yeah, and last but not least, Teng.
Yeah, sure. No, thanks for having me here today. It's Very fun discussion. Today I run like Chain of Thought, which is basically probably one of the top like open research firms that focuses entirely on the intersection between crypto and AI. So I think in the coming weeks you can definitely expect a lot more interesting like research around like these different areas. One thing that we're probably releasing in the next like 2 to 3 weeks as well is basically our crypto AI thesis part 2, which actually covers a lot of the different things that we discuss here around like data networks, like decentralized, like compute marketplaces, AI agents, and all of that. And we share our viewpoints on how we think this space is going to evolve. We also run a weekly newsletter that basically like covers and rounds up all the most important like crypto AI developments in the space, so you never miss a thing. And basically, you can find it on our website at chainofthought.xyz, or you can go to my Twitter account where all the links are there. So really trying to keep up with the latest in the space. Sometimes it's a little bit overwhelming, but we want to try and make it as easy as possible for all of us to really benefit from this wave.
Yeah, and I think just echoing what Teng said, it really is very overwhelming trying to keep up with crypto AI, especially when it's so technical, and sometimes some of this jargon that is being thrown around is just very, very difficult to keep up with. We're at the end of our meetup. I just want to thank all three of you, Synergy, Teng Yen, Andrew, for joining us today. It's been a great discussion. I think this really helps everyone sort of understand what's the latest going on with crypto AI. Why is it important, and sort of give us a sort of sneak peek of sort of where is it going. So thank you again so much for joining us. Again, thank you to Y for sponsoring and this meetup. For the guests and everyone on the call, including the speakers, if you guys are going to be in Bangkok for DEF CON next week, do come up to me and say hi. Do come up to the CoinGecko people and say hi. We also have our own event going on November 11th. It's GeckoCon, where we're going to deep dive into the Web3 gaming space. So if you guys are interested in that, you can actually get tickets through Candies. So go to our website and you can actually access that. It's a physical, but also there's going to be a virtual event for those who can't make it to Bangkok next week. And I think with that, I just want to say thank you everyone for staying up to the end. It's been really interesting, and it's been a great conversation. So thank you everyone. Take care, and exciting times ahead in 2025. Thanks
Cheers,
everyone.
y'all. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks everyone.